should we go ahead and get started?
Sure. Is ready?
We're ready.
Well, thank you to everybody for joining today. I'm just going to stand with you for a minute. We're glad that you're all here for this learning collaborative session. And just for a quick note, since no one's actually in the room, we don't need to go through this slide, but I think if we can mute lines, if there's a lot of background noise where you are, that would be great. But otherwise, keep them open so that you can participate with the presenters. Just acknowledging that the SBIRT School-Based Health Center project is a collaboration between the Colorado Office of Behavioral Health, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, and Peer Assistance Services. And so for today's training, we have a pre-survey that Kevin has linked to in the chat box, but I'm also going to show on the screen in a second. Then we'll go through some youth health data, positive youth development, talk about some youth health conversations, and then there will be a post-survey as well. And just please make sure that you're able to fill out both the pre and post surveys so that we have that data. So sorry about that background noise. I'm not sure.
You can do a mute all.
Okay. So on the pre-survey, if you've clicked on the link that Kevin put in the chat box, please make sure that you create a unique ID for the survey that you'll use on the post survey as well. It should be 3 letters followed by 3 numbers, for example, ABC123, and do not put your name, although I don't think there's a place to put your name on the SurveyMonkey. And so we'll give you guys just a few minutes to fill that out, and if maybe you can indicate when you're ready to go, that would be great, so we don't wait too long to get started with the content. I just don't know if it's us.
It's your computer.
That's what I was
I clicked on that SurveyMonkey and it wouldn't come up.
All right. So my name is Whitney Israel. I am a community and school specialist. Sorry, I'm yelling. If my volume is too loud or not loud enough, please feel free to write a message in the chat box and we'll try to address. I work at the Colorado School of Public Health. I work on the Healthy Kids Colorado Survey Project and Smart Source. And we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk about those 2 programs or surveys today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lauren Scott Okerblom, and I work in youth development at the State Health Department, so CDPHE. I also get to work with a youth advisory council, so I still get to work directly with young people, which is my passion. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about positive youth development, navigating conversations with youth, and some feedback actually that we've heard from our youth advisory council about being connected to school-based health centers. So lots of good stuff today.
Great. And like I mentioned, if you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. I also am completely okay with interruptions if you want to ask a question directly. I'd love this to be conversational, but I know that can be tough on a webinar. So whatever you're most comfortable with, we'll have some interactive questions towards the end of talking about youth data. So be ready for that.
Can I just interject as well and mention, if you haven't already, for those of you who have recently joined, please make sure to type your name, agency name, and email address into the chat box so that we can record you as having been in attendance. Thanks.
Oh, there we go. So talking about Healthy Kids Colorado Survey and Smart Source today, I'm going to go over what each of those surveys are, kind of the content of what's in them and who they're for. We're going to talk about how these two data sources are complementary. I'll go over a quick administration timeline if you're curious on when this is happening next, and some high-level need-to-knows, and then I'll do a little mini dive into some of the data that we see from the Healthy Kids Colorado survey. So I may have worked with some of you throughout the state. This is a statewide comprehensive youth survey. It's given every odd year. So our last administration was in 2017 in the fall, and the next one coming up is in the fall of 2019. The purpose of this survey is just to better understand health behaviors, choices, and protective factors that middle school and high school students are experiencing in Colorado. The survey, parts of it are also aligned with the National Youth Risk Behavior Survey, and that's an effort through the CDC. So that's a national survey and a comparison point for some of our questions. Just to get an idea of the scope of this project, in 2017, it was our largest administration in that we had, of our state sample, 190 middle school and high schools participate, which is about 56,000 students. But this is also a free resource for any schools that want to opt in, that want those local results. And including opt-in schools across the state, we had 410 middle school and high schools and over 80,000 students participate in the survey. So it's a very, very large effort. Some of the things that the Healthy Kids measures, I think it's most well known for that middle section, health behaviors or risk behaviors. We ask about substance use, alcohol, tobacco, vaping. We go over some safety and violence. We talk about nutrition and fitness, and we also ask about sexual health on the high school module only. I think what some people don't often know is that we also ask about protective factors. These are things that are in a young person's life that prevent or protect against risk behaviors. Things like trusted adults, school climate, and community involvement. And then where I think the heart of the survey really is the indicators around social-emotional outcomes. And this is measuring depression, suicide ideation, and some related behaviors such as bullying. The Colorado School of Public Health recently absorbed the SmartSource contract. It was previously housed at the Colorado Education Initiative. We worked in partnership with this effort, but now both surveys are being administered in collaboration at the Colorado School of Public Health. And I'll show you how regions are broken up as far as your contact person.
This and get to your email.
Was that a question? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
No.
So with DEI had the SmartSource, they started, the survey was developed in 2013. They administered 2 pilot surveys in 2014 and 2015. And in 2017, this was endorsed by the Office of School Nutrition and USDA to serve as the federally required assessment for local wellness policy. And I think this drove a lot of participation because many schools found this as an important and necessary evaluation tool for their local wellness policy. It was the largest administration, and 677 schools participated across the state. That's 37% of schools in Colorado. One different differentiation between Healthy Kids and SmartSource is that SmartSource is available for primary schools as well. So this is a K through 12 resource. Some of the topics or components of SmartSource are general health, policies and practices, nutrition, physical education, health services, counseling, safe schools environments, healthy school environments, family, community, and student involvement. We also cover staff health promotion. And again, like I mentioned, there's a section that covers what's needed to report on local wellness policies. It is developed to encompass all areas of the whole child, whole community, whole school model. I probably said that out of order. The WISC model, I'm sure you're all familiar with that. And what we are trying to do by administering both of these surveys at the same time is to create a complete picture of school health for schools and districts, and also for the state of Colorado. So you have your Healthy Kids Colorado survey, which is your student level data, your student level tool, and Smart Source, which is a school level tool. And Smart Source, I should have mentioned, is one survey administered at a building, meaning a team of people within a school come together to fill out one survey together and submit that, and then reports are delivered back, which is different from the student level tool, where every student in the selected classrooms of a school are taking the Healthy Kids Colorado survey. One thing we are going to be providing this next year for schools that participate in both, we are going to be delivering a paired indicator report that has information from both surveys presented together. And what this, before I get ahead of myself, I'll show you an example of that in a minute. But what we really want these two surveys to do is to help you identify areas of need and gaps in your schools towards student health and school health. We hope that this data can help your school make the case for funding needs, programs, and partnership. We hope that it can inform policy change, program change, to really sustainably change the outcomes of student health. And really these are just to help evaluate health and programs over time to see if the things that are happening in your school are effective. So this is an example of how the two data sources can be used together. Because there's overlapping topic areas, we can look at our student level data. That top bar graph is information from the Healthy Kids Colorado survey on sugar sweetened beverages. So the gray bars are middle school and the orange bars are high school. And this is your state estimates for how often young people are consuming these specific sugar sweetened beverages. So that first one is other. This contains juices, coffee drinks. The next one is sports drinks, which has the second highest rate of use or consumption. Then we have soda, diet soda, and energy drinks. By looking at what our students are consuming, we then would move to Smart Source to see what schools are implementing to prevent the consumption of sugar sweetened beverages. And my eyes are not great, but that first one is, these are all best practices that schools could be doing to prevent this behavior. So the first one is, are schools selling juices or sodas in their building? And I think this is the opposite. This does not sell. So those rates are really high because Colorado has policy that supports that. The second one is whether schools are prohibiting advertisement of unhealthy beverages, sugar sweet beverages in their building. You can see that drops off for high schools. Yeah, I should mention the 3 bars in Smart Source are the different levels of buildings. Blue is our primary or elementary schools. Yellow is our secondary schools that combines middle schools and high schools together. And the third are combined schools, schools that span across primary and secondary grades. But you can see that our combined schools have the lowest rate of prohibiting advertisements of sugar sweetened beverages. So you would look at that and say, maybe some work to do there. That third one is whether schools are have policy around healthy food and beverage for celebrations. And you can see that this is most used in elementary schools with the highest rate of prohibiting unhealthy foods and beverages at celebrations. So that's just an example of paired indicators from the two data sources. The administration cycle for both of these surveys is every other year in the fall of our odd years. So right now, we are in the spring of the odd year. We are recruiting schools to participate in both. Fall this year will be administration, and reports will be coming right back to schools starting in the spring of the even year. We try and turn those around as quickly as possible so that you can use your data for grant writing, which happens a lot in the beginning of a calendar year. In the summer of an even year, so next summer, the state results will be produced, and those do come out from CDPHE, and that's where our sample comes in. Those schools that are sampled are de-identified and represent the state's aggregate, so what's happening in Colorado. And then the fall of the even years, we really encourage schools to take a year off and to use the data that they got from the last administration and plug that into their local efforts. So some of the high-level need-to-knows, who can participate in these resources? Smart Source is available for schools K through 12. Healthy Kids is available to all secondary schools, the middle schools and high schools, and the grades that fall within those, 6 through 8, 9 through 12. We ask that our sampled schools participate in both so that we can really look at those paired indicators like I showed before across the state. But any school is able to opt in. So why should a school participate in this? Besides getting free reports and information about your students in school, all schools that participate in Smart Source receive a $100 stipend for participating, which is a little bit different from Healthy Kids. Only our sampled schools for Healthy Kids could receive a $300 stipend for participation. School level reports, like I mentioned, for both surveys and a combined paired indicator report if they participate in both. And of course, opting in is free, and that includes all of the reports and TA from our team as well. So some big changes to note coming this fall of 2019. Both surveys are now available online, and this is new for Healthy Kids. Healthy Kids survey is 120 questions at the high school level and 67 on the middle school module. It can still be completed in one class period. That's, we say 45 minutes, but kids seem to blast through this in about half an hour. Smart Source takes an average of an hour to 2 hours to complete as a team. And there are different ways that can look, and feel free to reach out to me if you want more information on any of this. And then we ask large schools to sample their classrooms for Healthy Kids. But if they do the survey online, they can do a census if they want all their students to take the survey. That is an option. So again, this is happening in the fall of 2019, but some of the planning for these efforts can happen now. So we are reaching out to schools across the state about these efforts. Your schools may have been contacted, or they may not have. We do some outreach to past opt-ins, but we really encourage people on the ground to be aware of these efforts and to advocate if they're wanting to see this done in their school. Because these are huge efforts and it is done statewide, we break things up by region. So I am one of 3 community and school specialists across Colorado. Christine has the northern half, so that green area, schools and districts that fall in those counties. Christine is their contact. I am based mostly in the metro area. I'm the blue. My colleague Lauren, not Lauren that's here today, but Lauren Chikara, has the southern region, the purple. So if you are falling in any of these areas, feel free to write down any of our contact information to ask more questions or to talk about possibly participating. So I wanted to show just a very, very small snippet of what kind of data comes out of the Healthy Kids Colorado survey. I wanted this to be interactive, but I know that's a little tough on webinars. So I'm going to pose some questions to you, and then I'll provide the state level answers. So one of the most popular topics on the Healthy Kids Colorado survey is substance use. But what's often not understood is the most used substances for youth across the state. So I'm going to quiz you and see if you know what students are using the most. So here are the substances that we ask about. And if you, in your head, or you can type it in the chat if you want, try and rank these in order of highest prevalence or most used substance to lowest. And I'll give you a second to do that. All right, time's up. If you said that alcohol was the most used substance, you were correct. Across the state of Colorado, 29% of high school students are drinking alcohol at least once in the past 30 days. I feel like this is a very, very common misunderstanding or misrepresentation. I think a lot of people think that marijuana is often the most used substance across Colorado, given our laws in this state around medical and recreational marijuana. Second highest is vaping, also called e-cigarettes, at 27%. So this is very, very close to alcohol. And I will note that we have the highest youth vaping rates in the nation. Some of the questions that we ask, specifically this one of vape use in the past 30 days, is aligned with the YRBS, so we can compare that nationally. And unfortunately, we are number one when we don't want to be. Third highest is marijuana. 19% of students have used marijuana in the past 30 days. Next and lowest is tobacco at 7%. And at the very bottom are prescription drugs taken without a doctor's prescription. Our team likes to take this data and look at it in different ways and pull in secondary data sources to see what other things we can find out about trends or patterns in our youth behavior. So this is something we did this last year with some of our different topic areas. We looked at the urban, suburban, and rural differences in some of our youth behaviors. And I wanted to show an example of substance use across these urbanicity groups. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but in our suburban and rural communities, smoking and vaping have the highest rates. It's a little bit lower in our urban communities, which might not be what one would assume. Alcohol use in our rural communities is the highest. And when you look at marijuana, you see some differences there where our urban young people are using marijuana at higher rates than those in suburban and rural communities. So this is just another way to look at some of the data. Here's another quiz question. How do you think the perception of harm among these substances measures up? So if we're going to take those same substances, right, to click, like it might show the answer. If we take those same substances that we just looked at before, can you rank them in order of what you think students think is the least harmful to most harmful? And that's a double perception question. So take a moment, try and think, what do students think is the most harmful versus the least harmful? All right. So if you thought that students thought tobacco and cigarettes were the most harmful, you're correct. 87%, I'm starting at the bottom here, 87% of students thought or think that using tobacco or smoking cigarettes regularly is harmful to them. Moving up from there, they think that 72% of students think that using alcohol regularly is harmful. 52% of students think that using marijuana regularly is harmful. And 50% of students think that using e-cigarettes or vape products are harmful. So if you think back at the 30-day use rates, e-cigarettes were among the highest prevalence, and traditional tobacco or cigarettes were among the lowest. And if you now compare that with the perceptions of harm in students, it's the opposite. So we do know that perception of harm is a protective factor to substance use. And over the years, we've done a lot of work in public health to increase perception of harm of cigarettes in our communities. And I think that's contributed to the low rates of use in young people. And unfortunately, e-cigarettes are new, and the same amount of effort in policy change, education, to not only our young people, but to communities as a whole, just hasn't been done to the same capacity. And I think that message is showing in our youth and young people using vape products or e-cigarettes, and the perception of harm of using these products. So just interesting patterns that we get from this survey. So looking at mental health, I'm going to ask you where you think Colorado youth fall when compared to the nation with our mental health, and who you think the groups, demographic groups by race, by sex, and by sexual orientation, which groups of students do you think are most at risk for poor mental health and suicide ideation? So if you thought that Colorado was the same across the nation as far as our depression and suicide ideation, you were right. If you look at that top column, those are the national rates of that first column of students feeling sad and hopeless, the second of students having planned a suicide, and the third of students having attempted a suicide. I think you and everyone else looking at this would feel that these seem high given the severity of the health outcomes. But I do like to point out how close those numbers are, and that there are people that question the validity of the Healthy Kids survey data. And I think that this is very telling that some of these data points are only off by 0.1 with the nation. If the data wasn't valid, it would be very, very hard to match these numbers so precisely. Looking at disparities between our subgroups, because we do ask demographic questions, we can see that our female population is experiencing depression and suicide ideation at higher rates than males. Males do die by suicide more often than females. So I think it's a common misconception that they're suffering from these health outcomes as far as suicide ideation and depression at higher rates, which is not the case. When we look at race ethnicity, almost all of our different race ethnicity groups have higher rates of suicide ideation and depression when compared to our white subpopulation. And then looking at grade level, things are mostly the same across the board. They don't change too often. And then when we compare sexual orientation, our lesbian, gay, and bisexual students are experiencing depression and suicide ideation at significantly higher rates than our heterosexual students as well. I think if any of you have been working in public health and have looked at health equity, none of this may have been a surprise to you. This is just a summary that our female students have higher rates of depression and suicide ideation when compared to males. Our American Indian and Alaska Native students had the highest rates of suicide ideation compared with all of the other populations. And of course, our LGBT students are experiencing much higher rates of depression and suicide ideation compared to our heterosexual students. On the lighter side of things, I'll ask you what you think protective factors are when it comes to mental health of our youth population. supportive relationships, especially with parents and other adults, you would be correct. This is one of our strongest, if not our strongest, protective factor, not only for mental health, but also for substance use and many other risk behaviors in young people. Also, protective factors are safe environments, for example, safe schools, safe school climates, school and community engagement, as well as access to resources, which is not something that Healthy Kids measures, but I thought it was worth mentioning. And I will note that these protective factors are especially true and protective for some of our most at-risk youth populations, such as our LGBT and T young people. So I thought this was a really good lead-in to what my colleague Lauren is going to be talking about today, especially with that first one, supportive relationships. So I'm going to hand things over to Lauren to go over things next, but I think we do have a little time to answer any questions if anything came up. And I can't see the chat feature from here. Can you see that, Kevin?
Yeah, we don't have any questions quite yet, but I did just want to make notice that we hear the feedback as well, folks. We just wanted to leave it open for this question section, and then we'll mute everybody right after this. And then feel free to ask questions verbally or type them into the chat box here.
While we're waiting for some questions to come in, Lauren had a really, really good suggestion. If you are interested in finding either local data or regional state level data, and you're wondering where you get a hold of this, Healthy Kids COLO.org is CDPHE's website, where you can find more information, not only just about what Healthy Kids is, but where you can access regional and state level data. When I say region, we have 21 health statistic regions across Colorado. That's how we have decided to break up and disseminate data for Healthy Kids. So there are neighboring communities or counties that are lumped together as part of a health statistic region.
Oh, Lord.
So,
It's only been going for 30 minutes. I've got 1 hour and a half left.
if you're looking for local data, so a school or a district results from the survey in 2017, we don't share those publicly, and the schools and districts own those reports themselves. So you would have to connect with them. If you don't know who to reach out to at a school, that's something our team can help with, connecting you to the right people. And if you feel that maybe your school doesn't participate, also feel free to reach out to us to help support you get comparable data or regional data to support the needs of your work.
Are there any more questions, or did anything come up?
Any other questions, since we add that link to the website where folks can find that data?
I don't know if we listed it at the very end, but again, it's healthykidcolo.org.
I typed it into the chat box.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Is there anything else? Okay, I think we're going to mute everyone. So if you have something to add or feedback or suggestions, just put it in the chat box. Kevin will hopefully let me know. So thanks, Whitney, for going over the data. I think it's a really powerful tool to see the experiences of young people. They're actually taking that survey, and so we can use that data to inform lots of things that we do as adults, how we can create spaces for young people and them wanting to show up. So my section is really going to be talking about positive youth development. So a little bit of background on what that is and what to think about. We don't have a ton of time, but a little bit of time to talk about implementation of that. And then around conversation. So, we know from the data that there's lots of health behaviors that young people are experiencing, and how do we start to have those health conversations with youth? Since we're going to be talking about working with youth, the first area that I wanted to start with, if I can get this to go next, are to do a little introduction, to think back to the time when we were in adolescence. So I want you in the chat box to write 1 to 3 words that would describe you as an adolescent. So when you are a young person, what are 1 to 3 words? So you get to choose 1, 2, or 3. What are some words that would describe you as an adolescent? Once those start coming in, I'll have Kevin read some of those out. But thinking back to what it was like to be a young person, and I'll share mine as well.
Goofy.
Goofy, I love it.
Shy.
Shy, yep.
Hyper.
Hyper, oh.
Nerdy, insecure, bully, quiet, awkward, introvert, lost.
Yeah. Does anyone in the room, we have some folks in the room, Whitney, do you want to share some of yours?
I feel like all of the ones I thought of have already been said. Nerdy, hyper.
Yeah.
Shy at times. Shy. Yeah.
Emotional. Kevin, do you have anything to share?
Yeah, I mean, hyper. It's pretty well.
So my words would be shy and insecure, definitely fell into that, and then also opinionated, like in the right space. I was like, I'm going to tell you what I think about this. Super opinionated. So just starting off to get us in that empathetic space of remembering what it was like to be a young person. I mean, some of us had we had different experiences, and so remembering back that it wasn't, sometimes as adults it's easy to think about that time wasn't as difficult maybe as it was. So just having that empathetic lens. And also that we showed up in lots of different ways. And so when we're working with young people, we know that they're going to show up in that space. There were similarities and then some variety in that too. So honoring the different experiences that we had and how that shaped our lives and also the experiences of young people. So thank you for being a little bit vulnerable or thinking back to that time in middle school. I try to avoid thinking back to that time, but not everyone does. So just starting there when we think about youth development and positive youth development. So positive youth development, some of you may be more familiar with this approach than others, but it's approach is used across the nation. It's an evidence-based public health theory. So what that means is there's been research around positive youth development. And it's an approach that really focuses on supporting young people in a successful transition to adulthood. So how do we create systems, structures, programs, and policies that allow young people that opportunity to transition into adulthood successfully? What do they need? How do we put things in place? How do we use this lens and approach it? It works for all young people, an approach. And it's not a program. So I'm not going to be like, oh, do A, B, and C, implement it this way. It's about using this approach and lens and applying it to the work that you're doing. So this is just a little bit background on PYD. So kind of the core components of positive youth development is that we're allowing young people to gain the skills they need, the opportunities to practice those skills, and the authentic relationships everywhere that they're in. So in our programs, in our policies, in our practices, so that young people can reach their potential and that successful transition to adulthood. So it's really adaptable. The skills that young people need to be a successful adult varies across different young people. So getting to know our youth and our programs, policies, and practices do create space for young people to have these core components in their life. And I just said this before, but if you have any questions, please jump in, put stuff in the chat. I don't think you can talk, but I can open the line. We can open the lines at one point. And if you have a lot of experience in positive youth development, or there's things about adolescent development or working with youth that you want to share, I won't say challenge because I don't like that word, but I will encourage you to step into that space and share your experience, expertise, because I know a lot of you have worked in this area and worked with young people for a long time. So one thing that we do when we talk about positive youth development is that youth development piece. If we can understand what's happening at a developmental time period for young people, it can help us as adults experience things more objectively, approach situations more objectively, and really build in these things into our programs, policies, and practices. If we know that developmentally young people are going to experience these things, how do we prepare for that and make sure that what we're doing is supporting young people in this development piece? So using a developmental lens, there's 8 tasks that young people go through, and tasks to kind of think of like jobs. So these are the things that young people are going to navigate as they're going through development. And we're going to just talk about them broadly, but I have some handouts that I can send out later that'll talk about early adolescence, middle adolescence, and late adolescence. So you can think about these developmental tasks at each of those time periods because they are a little bit different for young people in those different stages. So these are the 8 tasks that young people will go through. So the first 2, kind of figuring out their body. So figuring out a new body, we know that during development that there's often growth spurts, your body is changing, physically. So that's an interesting thing to navigate as you start to look different and feel different, change your height. What's also, I don't know, for better or for worse during development, that it doesn't often happen in sync. So young people may show up looking awkward, and they're probably actually feeling awkward as well because their bones and muscles might be growing at different rates. And so they're trying to figure out how they show up in the world with a different body. And thinking back to that time, if you remember when your body changed, it's a lot to navigate. And you need no more sleep when it's first changing. You might be eating more with growth spurts. You're trying to figure this out. Sexuality, I mean, this is something, how do you figure out how you show up in the world related to sexuality? What are your values and beliefs on sexuality? How do you show up with either masculine or feminine or somewhere along that continuum? What does that mean for you? Taking on those relationships, how do you think about dating someone more serious? Who do you like? Often in middle adolescence, we see a lot of change in relationships. People are trying to figure out who they're connected to, who they care about. What does it mean to be active sexually or not, or what does that cease to? And older adolescents tend to thinking more deeply about those relationships and what are long-term relationships mean to me? What does it mean to be in love, and what does this look like? And then in early adolescence, often young people feeling shy or starting to be more secretive or trying to understand that sexuality, maybe a little bit more exploring this, but not quite being ready to talk about it as they're, is this normal? Is this supposed to be happening to me? Is this the feelings that I'm supposed to be feeling? We know that young people's brains changes in adolescence. So you think about the first two and trying to navigate that, and your brain is actually changing, and it's changing really quickly. You're thinking in a new way. So in childhood and early childhood, young people think, or children think in things being concrete. So being able to see things, physically interact with them, really concrete thinking. As your brain starts to change and the way it processes information, you start to be able to think more abstractly. So abstract concepts like respect and starting to understand that. Empathy is a really interesting one. If you think about putting yourself in someone else's shoes or understanding someone else's experience, that's a really abstract concept. So our young people are just starting to navigate this abstract way of thinking, especially in early adolescence. And I often hear from adults who are like, oh, young people, they're not empathetic. I'm like, that's a learned skill that they're trying to navigate this world and figure out with this brain, how do they start to see things and think about things in a new way? What's their sense of self? Like lots of identities associated with it. Who are they? You know, again, into the values and beliefs. What are their values and beliefs about things? How do they feel about this? I will say oftentimes when values and beliefs come up or you are trying to figure out your own values and beliefs, you push back or you challenge or you question the values and beliefs that you've been given. So if you think about maybe teacher-parent or teacher-youth relationships or parent-caregiver relationships, challenging those or questioning those values and beliefs as you start to understand your own, that can often cause friction or challenges. And then relationships. We know that during adolescence that young people start to turn more to be with their peers, but also navigating what is the relationship with their peers. In childhood, often friendships are, you know, because parents take you to the soccer camp or you go to different places, but as you go through to adolescence, you start to be able to choose your own peers. What does that look like? Who are people that are important to me? Why are those people important to me? And wanting that connection to peers. And as they start to want independence, connecting more to their peers. Figuring out new relationships with parents and caregivers. So oftentimes this causes tension as well as young people wanting to step into that role of becoming independent. So instead of being in younger childhood, adults are often the managers of young people's lives, young people wanting to take on more of that management and have adults be the consultants in their lives. And we'll talk a little bit about manager consultants later, but that can cause tension as you're trying to go back and forth and figure out what does this relationship look like, allowing independence. But we also know that even though young people want independence, they also want those adults to be there for them. Like the data that Whitney showed, that trusted adult, that authentic relationship is so important as young people are trying to navigate this world. And then where is their place in the world? What does it look like for them in the future? Where do they think they belong? What does it look like? Starting to think of that abstract thinking of this big, huge world that we live in. Where's my space? And these don't happen nice and neatly. Like it would be wonderful if you're like, okay, today, growth spurt, got it? Check, I'm done with my growth spurt, gonna move on to my sexuality. Now I'm gonna figure out this weird thing with my brain. It's like one step forward, one step back. Sexuality one day, you're figuring this out, you're not sure where you're at, and it's confusing. And I know PowerPoint etiquette is you're not supposed to have this many bullet points on a slide, but I put these all up here because, man, this is a lot. And I think as adults, when we get into spaces, we forget, because we have mortgages and we have all these responsibilities, we forget how complicated this time is. I think that as a society, we forget that this is a lot to navigate and figure out about yourself. And we often, and I say we, meaning society, not necessarily people on this call, or maybe you're all different, we think, oh man, young people are so self-centered. And it's like, hey, if you have to figure out all this stuff about yourself, you probably do need to turn inward a little bit to think about these things and how you show up. So allowing that space, changing that perception that maybe our young people are self-focused to navigate this all in this world. And I didn't mention that there's societal pressures to this, there's cultural pressures to this. If young people are trying to figure out some of their spaces in this or some of their identities, it might not be safe to do that in the spaces and places that they're at. If it's not accepted, or you can't talk about it, or you can't figure this out. And we know that young people might show up really differently one day to the next as they try to figure this out. I just wanted to give that space. I get really passionate about this, but I didn't know if anyone had any questions specifically around development or experiences or things that they wanted to share. And I would say put it in the chat box if you have things to share or a question about some of these tasks with development. I never know with webinars, so create space, so feel free, don't be afraid to add stuff if you have things or experiences that you want to share with us. So a story that I usually tell with this slide too is that sometimes young people can show up really differently as they're navigating this world. So one of my coworkers will give this presentation to young people sometimes, because what we found is that often, not always, but often, young people don't know that what they're experiencing in these tasks are typical, that that's supposed to be what they're experiencing. So I have young people come up to me and like, I didn't know that as I was figuring out these things about my sexuality, that was okay to feel that way, or that was like what I was supposed to be doing. And when I talk about development, I'll talk about things typically, because what we know with development is there's no normal. There's typical times that things happen, but there's no normal. So it's really interesting to hear that young people didn't know that, yeah, this is what I'm actually supposed to be doing. So my coworker was giving this presentation to a group of young people, and she was actually talking about her experience growing breasts. And for her, that was a really difficult transition. She wasn't ready for that, to show up as how she would define a woman. It was a scary place. So it actually kind of shut her down and closed her off a little bit, because she was like wearing baggy t-shirts, like, what is happening to my body? I'm not ready for this. And so sometimes we have assumptions when young people show up that way, that maybe there's substance use or substance abuse or disconnecting or disengaging. And she was like, oh my gosh, my body is changing. I have no idea how to handle this. And so she's telling this story to young people, and this young man in the back, which is typically, young men in the back, his face like lights up. And we're talking about breasts. So we're like, who knows where this conversation is gonna go. But she decides, I'm gonna ask him what he's thinking, because he's thinking something's going on. And she looks at him and says, I saw your face light up, what are you thinking? And he's like, I remember the day I became a man. So this is like this epiphany that he has in this class. He remembers the day he became a man. He hadn't thought about it before. It's clear that this is like an aha moment. And she's like, okay, do I ask him about this? Because this could go lots of different ways in this like setting. And she's like, okay, tell me a little bit more about this. And he's like, I grew a chest hair 3 inches long. And she was like, okay, chest hair overnight, 3 inches. And for lack of a better term, that was like his manhood right there. He knew it because of that chest hair. And she's like, okay, what happened next? And he's like, I did not wash that chest hair. Like nothing could happen to that chest hair because that was so important to him. His body was different. He knew he was a man in that space. And so she's like, okay, what did you do next? He's like, went to school. And he tells the story that he went to school next day, a different person. Like, he's like, no, miss, I'm not taking my textbook today. I'm not going to do that. And it's not that we can ask every young person that, did you grow a chest hair last night or something like that, but have this understanding that he was trying to grapple with what it meant to be a man. And in some cultures, we have spaces where people know what it's like to transition to becoming a man, a woman, or however you do, whatever identity you connect to. And other spaces we don't. And so it doesn't mean that behavior can continue, but teacher was like, what is going on? Like, is there substance abuse? Is there like been trauma? What's happened? And that this young person was navigating this developmental task. And it doesn't mean that those things can't be happening, but how do we think about the conversations and what perceptions do we have of young people as they're trying to figure this out? But from day to day, they might show up differently. Like I remember the day I got my period, which I won't talk too much about that story, but it was like life altering. And I remember wanting my period so bad because I knew that I was like gonna be an adult then. Now I'm like, would never want that for anyone, but thinking about navigating that world and what that feels like to understand like what people want and how they're experiencing this, and doesn't mean they're showing up differently from day to day. And also, do we have any perceptions and assumptions? I think especially that figuring out a new body, we might make assumptions about young people because they look like they're at a developmental stage that maybe they're not, maybe they're there physically, but they're not there with some of the other developmental tasks. So having that understanding, or do we have expectations, assumptions, because someone looks a certain way, dresses a certain way, is navigating this task in a different place? And that our young people aren't going to do this together. So can imagine what it would be like for a young person to be the tallest, to grow boobs first, whatever that looks like, and people that are behind their peers, ahead of their peers, and how they're trying to figure out this world. So just something to think about, that all these tasks and the ways that it impacts young people to show up, and can we design our programs, our policies, our practices with this kind of thing in mind? Can we create spaces to have conversations? Can we build that trust so young people know who to go to talk about these things? Do we have information for them to access? What does that look like for them? So again, I don't know if there's any other questions or stories. I'm open to hearing stories if people want to share anything like that. I know you can see your name next to your story, so I don't want to call anyone out, but does anyone have anything they want to ask or share? Okay, I'm going to keep asking because someone at one point will have something to ask or share with this developmental tasks. And like I said, I'll send out some more detailed pieces about this that breaks it down by early, middle, and late adolescence, because it is different based on, a little bit different based on where young people are at in adolescence. So another thing to talk about with adolescence is the brain. And I'm not a neuroscientist, but if there's neuroscientists on the line or people that want to add stuff, please do. I geek out about the brain because it was life altering for me to learn about what's happening during adolescence and what's happening to the brain. What's also interesting about adolescent development is that until maybe like the last 15 years, there hadn't been a ton of research on adolescence. It was like early childhood, aging or older adults. And then we started doing more research and found out that there's so much stuff happening during adolescence, and there's so much stuff that's happening to the brain. We actually define adolescence as being between the ages of 9 all the way up to about 25. So you've even heard that 25 end cut being a little bit, maybe stretching a little bit later. The reason we have such a long period of adolescence is what's actually happening with the brain. So if you think about when you were 9 and when you were 25 and how much you changed and what happened during that period, there was a lot going on, I can almost guarantee. What we also know, and the reason we talk so much about adolescent development and positive youth development, is that this is one of the healthiest times in life. Like if you're going to get sick, you want to get sick during adolescence because your body is like the strongest. But preventable disease and death rates increase 200 to 300% during adolescence. So we know that because of some risk taking and some things that happen, that this is a time that we can really support young people in navigating this world and reduce that high preventable disease and death rate, and help them understand what decision making and risk taking looks like. Okay, so back to the brain. So what we know, and I'll talk about the brain as powerful, but what we know about the adolescent brain, it is so powerful that there actually are more synapses in your brain during adolescence than there are in adulthood. So young people are primed to learn new information. If you've ever worked with them or have conversations with them, their ability to make connections to things, to understand things is amazing. So we actually know that their brain is primed to learn more information new information than maybe say adults. I don't want to say that the adult brain, you're out of luck. The brain is very plastic. You can always learn new information. We just know that our young people are primed to do that more than we are in adulthood. What we also know about the brain is that by the age of 12, typically, the size of the brain is there. So it's not going to grow anymore. What's happening is it's restructuring. Actually, by the age of 6, 95% of the brain is there. So it's only going to grow a little bit more. I like to use the word restructuring instead of developing, because when I say developing, people are like, oh, part of the brain is missing in young people. I'm like, oh no, it's not missing. They're just not as quick to access different parts of their brain as it restructures. So I like to use that language because it gives us hope that we can support young people in accessing those parts of the brain that they may not be able to access as quickly. It doesn't mean they can't access that. So what's happening is the brain is restructuring. It's going from the front to the back. So in like early childhood, you have a really connected back part of your brain. And during adolescence, your brain is strengthening those connections to the prefrontal cortex. That front part of, I don't know if you can see, people can see this, but that front part of the brain. And guess what the prefrontal cortex is responsible for? Decision-making, logical processing, impulse control, empathy is actually processed there. So all of that higher level functioning that as adults we can see that young people can be challenged by, we actually know the brain is not as quick to access that because they haven't built those pathways. It's restructuring to connect to that part of the brain. Like I said, it doesn't mean they can't access this. So there's a doctor that does a great video presentation, Dr. Frances Jensen, and she uses a term that I like, so I borrowed it. It's called the frontal lobe assist. So we can, as adults in the lives of young people, help young people accessing that prefrontal cortex. Practicing, what does it make to do a big decision, make a decision? Are there baby steps that we can help young people practice, think through? Because we know that the more you practice, it strengthens those pathways in your brain. So the more you think about something in a certain way, the more you do a behavior or habit over and over again, we're strengthening those pathways. So we have the power to support young people in accessing that part of their brain and strengthening those pathways. What's also really amazing about the adolescent brain is that it hasn't gone through the pruning process. So during adolescence, your brain is going through a pruning process and it's getting rid of the pathways in your brain that you don't use and making the pathways that you use faster, right? That makes sense. You want your brain to be as efficient as possible. So you're going to get rid of things that you haven't used or you're not using and make that, actually it's called myelination, make the pathways that you do use as fast as possible. So an example, I played the clarinet in 3rd grade, not very well in 3rd grade, but I did play it. And then I stopped in like 5th grade. And so my brain over time was like, oh, clarinet, all the pathways related to that, you're not using that, let's get rid of it. If I wanted to learn clarinet today, I could. The amount of practice and the time that it would take to build that pathway in my brain would be a lot more than if I continued that through adolescence. So another thing to talk about adolescence during this time is that it's a use it or lose it time, right? Like if you're not using the things or doing the things that you love to do, you're gonna lose that skill. Conversely, if you're doing things that maybe you're not super excited about, you're going to create those pathways in your brain and strengthen them, and it's going to be more difficult to have to bypass that pathway in the future. So there's a ton of power in supporting our young people and finding their spark. What do they love to do? Building and strengthening those pathways in their brain. It's also a double-edged sword because you can strengthen pathways that maybe aren't conducive to your health and well-being. So I think substance use is a great one. If you are an early initiator of substance use, you're strengthening that pathway in your brain, and it's going to make it more difficult to overcome addictions later in life because you have strengthened that pathway. So not to say that it's all good, but there's a ton of potential. It's actually, there's evidence that your IQ can change during adolescence, which is pretty awesome, that we have this hugely powerful brain, and how do we allow young people to use it and experiment with it and think about things in different ways, to try on different things, get excited about different things. So another thing about the brain going from back to front is that oftentimes when there's a stressful situation, young people are more likely to respond to situations with their amygdala. So that amygdala is that fight, flight, freeze response that you want your body to have actually to a threat. You want to survive the threat, so you want your body to react to that. So let's say I'm going to knock on wood that this doesn't happen, but like a spider fell from the ceiling and landed on me. I don't want to logically process. I hate spiders, by the way. This is like not my fear, but I don't want like to logically process that, like, where did that spider come from? Is it poisonous? How big is it? I'm going to be like, oh, get it off me, like freezing, and maybe it'll fall off, or like stomping into the ground, or like running out of the room, because that's what's going to protect me and my body, that not the logical processing. So it's kind of that amygdala hijack. Your amygdala takes over so that you can survive. What's really interesting about the amygdala is it doesn't have to be like a physical threat like that spider. It can also be a perceived threat. So what is your perception of the threat in that situation? And if you perceive a threat, are you more likely to respond with that amygdala? And we know that young people are. So if you're responding with your amygdala, it is almost impossible to access the prefrontal cortex So that spot where you're logically processing, making decisions. It's the same for youth and adults, but we know that young people are more likely to go into that spot in times of stress, perceived threat, what that looks like for them. So talking to young people, are talking about this brain, like how do we create spaces that young people can feel safe so that they're not in that amygdala space. They're not, another way to think about it is flipping your lid. Their lid is not flipped and they're not only processing with their amygdala. And when you're in that perceived threat space, you need to feel safe and comfort, right? If you're thinking about a threat, what's the reverse of that? So how do we allow young people in spaces to feel safe and comfortable? How can we create those environments? And oftentimes we don't know what is gonna cause that young person to react with that amygdala. And some of their reactions might come off as defensiveness or arguing or pushing back or some of those things that are difficult for adults to understand, and because it could be that amygdala response. I know young people tell me that going into a provider's office, a healthcare office, can actually be like a threatening space. And so if we know that, are there ways that we can design those spaces so they're less threatening to young people? I mean, I know I feel like threatened to talk to even my doctor about some of my personal health choices or things that I've done. And so if we know that, what does that trust look like? What does that space look like so that young people can experience that? You know, getting people to feel that safe and comfort area could be like music or like toys or being able to draw or just spaces that we allow our young people to not feel like they're threatened. So I was doing a presentation with folks that work in juvenile detention, and you can imagine how many young people go into those spaces feeling threatened and responding with that fight, flight, freeze response, and that they have to have difficult conversations. And so they created a space where young people could listen to music, you know, before their intake, so they could help them kind of get into a space that maybe they weren't completely out of that perceived threat, but they were in a space that maybe they could access that prefrontal cortex a little bit better. And then as adults, like noticing when we're in that space. Like I talk about this a lot, and then I'll go home and be like processing my like interaction with my partner, being like, oh my gosh, and my lid is flipped, I'm like fight, flight, freeze because he said something or the dishes weren't done right. And so just noticing when we're having that heightened emotional response, and how do we get to feeling that we can feel safe? Do we need to take breaks? Who's our support? Especially if we're dealing with like difficult situations with young people. And so what do we need to do to support ourselves so that our brain is not in that space, we're in that amygdala spot. And I also think it's really interesting, I won't talk about politics, but it's interesting, even like if someone's threatening the way you see the world or your situation, it can put you into that space. And so thinking about difficult conversations about politics even, that people often are showing up with that fight, flight, freeze response because someone's threatened the way maybe they see the world or how they believe about things, and knowing we can't have conversations if we're in spaces that we're responding like that. So just thinking about, it was really eye-opening to me to think about that how much that amygdala can play into just interactions and relationships, and what does that look like in your spaces. Does anyone have anything to add? I've been talking a lot. Does anyone have anything to add about the brain or experiences, like things they've done around fight, flight, freeze response in their clinics or in their spaces or work?
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm in the room, so I can ask. I've heard a lot that early adolescence especially is a very impressionable time. So the experiences that they have can really alter the direction, the pathway of their life moving forward. And I think back to my early adolescence, and it wasn't necessarily, like you were saying, the skills that I was building or repeating over and over, but individual experiences, like a travel experience, had a bigger impression on me at that time than it does now. And how does that fit into all of that?
Ooh, that's a great question. I'm like, how do I answer that? I think depending on how you interact with that situation too. So when I think about the brain, like memory is a really interesting thing. Thinking back to that memory, you can like strengthen that pathway. So if that experience put you in a space where you had such positive experiences, you actually in your amygdala store memory and memory of emotion. So when you think back to that, you remember that emotion experience. So that's kind of where I would answer that I think you're creating a pathway of like that positive feeling and thought process with that. Also with the amygdala, you can cause like negative emotions and memories of those emotions to be stored there as well. So that's where things like triggering can come up, like that young person might not even know what has triggered them, but that memory of emotion has showed up there. I don't know if I know enough about like early adolescence and impressionable for later years, so I might have to look that up, but that's the kind of where my mind goes about how powerful this amygdala is. Yeah.
So we have a comment from online.
Oh, awesome.
I heard one school-based health center, to make the clinic more comfortable for you, put curtains over the internal organ diagrams in the clinic. So when the provider needs to reference that diagram, then they could draw back the curtain.
Okay. So maybe it made it, I don't know the example, made it uncomfortable for that space. They're like, oh, there's a penis over here, or like whatever. I don't want to have a conversation when it's like staring at me in the face. That's awesome.
Clinical, very
Yeah.
formal.
Thanks, Christian. Is there anything else that people have done in the clinic space or within their schools to create a more inviting space for young people? I'm sure there's lots of things out there that people have done. One thing that I'll say that I've learned is it's so powerful to have young people help you shape those spaces. As adults, sometimes we try to think about what young people would want, and then we are like asking people, are like, oh, that's such a simple thing to do differently to create this space that makes young people feel more comfortable and safe to enter into these conversations. And I have some suggestions or some things that young people brought up as barriers that they experience going to clinics, not necessarily just school-based health centers, but a mix of school-based health centers and clinics, which is something to think about with the brain. Yeah, but this was like my aha moment that I was trying to have a conversation with a young person who was in that amygdala space. They were in tears and they were crying, and I kept asking like prefrontal cortex questions, like, what do you want to do differently? Like, what should we do? And all these questions, and she just kept crying. And I remember like, I need to stop asking questions and like, what do I need to do to make this young person feel safe? Like, what does it look like to just sit and cry for a second? And that's okay. Or go for a walk, or take a break, or why am I trying to communicate with when there's not a way to communicate right now? I'm forcing something that's not going to work. And so in our space, we created an opportunity that if you feel overwhelmed like that, to take a break and to come back, to walk it off. Often movement is helpful, breathing exercises, stuff like that, that we know can make young people, like, or all people, but especially young people, improve those experiences. And what as adults can we do? And that's one thing that I haven't mentioned about positive youth development, that oftentimes I'll hear that it's, oh, how do we change young people? And really I'm going to challenge us to think about how as adults do we change the spaces and places and experiences of young people? Because what I found is that if you can do that, it's more likely that young people will show up and be engaged and be connected with you if we can do kind of our own work instead of asking young people to change how they are and who they are in those spaces. Okay, last call for anything about the brain. Awesome. Like I said, I'm not a neuroscientist. This is just like my passion. So I could spend another like talking about the brain and how this shows up, but we know that this often drives behavior. And so having this understanding and that space where we can have that objective lens that, hey, I'm noticing defensiveness and all these emotions from this young person. Are they showing up in a space that they're in that amygdala hijack, or they're processing with their amygdala for some reason that I don't know about? We won't talk a ton about trauma, but we also know with trauma that young people are more likely to respond with their amygdala if they've experienced a lot of trauma or like long-term stress of their lives. So just knowing that in our spaces and places, we often don't know the backgrounds of young people, and we just see them for that short time period, that 15 minutes, or they're in our classroom or they're in a clinic. And so there is probably a ton of other things that young person's experienced that could impact their behavior and how they're showing up, and being in spaces that we can acknowledge that and support them as they're trying to navigate that difficult time. Yeah. Okay. So another thing about positive youth development, and I talked a little bit about this earlier, is that in childhood, really our jobs as adults in young people's lives are to be their managers, right? Like when you're in kindergarten, like I need to help you manage your life, pack your lunch. You don't want to bring your coat to school, so I'm trying to stick your coat in your backpack. Like you're running out the door forgetting something, then it's my job to help you do that. And as you transition into adolescence, my job might change a little bit and allow you that space to become the manager of your own life. Because what I want as an adult is that I don't want to have to manage your life forever. And so how can we slowly start to give our young people opportunities to become managers in their own lives? And that could look different for lots of different young people, right? But we're giving them the opportunity to learn decision-making. What does it look like as they start to manage those pieces of their lives? So I challenge people to enter into the consultant space. And one thing that I say about being a consultant is I challenge you not to give advice. So that is often hard because advice comes from a place of love, and I love my mother to death. And if I hear any more advice about certain things, I'm like, I'm going to lose it. So the thing that I challenge you to do is, instead of giving advice, to offer guidance. And I have some people like with the language, they're like, I agree or I don't agree. The reason I say guidance is that that's really that consultant space. Like if you think about a consultant, they're not there to solve the problems necessarily, they're there to help you think through this problem, think about different scenarios, what would that look like, what are your options, have discussions. Because what I want is I want young people to be empowered to make their own decisions. I don't want them to think that they have to come to me to manage a problem, that I will be there as a support whenever they need, but they can do it. And I don't want them to feel like this learned helplessness, that they can't do it without me. And to know that they have the skills to navigate the situation. I had a young person text me and then call me that she was concerned about her friend that had a mental health challenge. And I was like, I definitely will call to have a conversation with you. And I didn't know her friend. I'm not connected to the school, so I didn't really have any connection. There's not a lot I could do to support that young person that was experiencing the mental health challenge. So in talking with this young person, she just kept saying, she's like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know what to do. That was the whole part of this beginning of the conversation. And as we talked, she's like, well, I guess I could do this. I was like, that sounds like a great idea. How would you do that? She's like, well, I could talk to my mom or this person. And by the end of the conversation, she had like 3 solid pathways or things that she could do to navigate if her friend was in a difficult situation again. And so all I had to do was say, that sounds like a great idea. How would you do that? And help her navigate that. And I said to her, I was like, you know what to do. And so at the end of that call, she doesn't need to call me again. She knows what to do. And so giving her that support and that guidance and thought process as that consultant. I will say that this becomes more difficult as a parent, right? If you're a parent and trying to be that consultant role with young people that, sometimes they make decisions that you're like, okay, I wouldn't make that decision. I'm like trying to guide you and you're still going to make that choice. So acknowledging that this can be difficult, but the power and giving our young people the opportunity to navigate those situations and learn from it and to create those pathways in their brain. So what does that look like? And I know that I can't make decisions for young people. Like they will decide in that moment, they will make that decision. So have I helped them think through that situation so that they can make the decision that works best for them? Even if it's a hard decision, that consultant piece, that I'm not going to make that decision for them in that moment, they're going to have to make that. And that's been hard for me. I've had some young people tell me about some behaviors that they're deciding to do or not to do. And so walking away from the conversation being like, I don't know what they're going to decide, but I hope we've discussed this enough that they feel like they can make the decision in that moment. And being there and supporting them, whether they make a decision where they fall down on the ground and get back up again, whatever that looks like, I'm there. But, and I'm not judging them, but I haven't told them what to do because especially if you're trying to figure out your space in this world, have independence, that I want to give you that opportunity to make those mistakes and learn from them as well. So an acronym that we often use in our office is called FAIL, First Attempt in Learning, and that sometimes we're afraid to let young people fail, and that if you're going to learn, you have to fail, right? Like think about all the times that you've learned something new. You've probably failed a couple times, failed once to get to that space. So instead of being afraid to fail, how do we help young people fail in ways that are supportive to them? Or what happens if they fail and come back to us that we're not meeting them with judgment? We're like, this happened, now what do we do? And allowing that space. I also hear from a lot of young people that they're afraid to fail. And so like norming that it is okay to fail that test, to fail this experience, and that's your first attempt in learning. How do we come back from this? That we know to move forward in life, you have to fail, and so giving them that space to fail. So any thoughts or questions on that? Any pushback? I love those discussions. If you have challenges or think about things differently, let me know.
I see that message applies to adults too, especially parents failing in their attempt to put some of these ideas into practice.
Yes, I love that. Thank you. That you're not going to do anything perfectly, and that is like the enemy of everything. That like oftentimes conversations are going through development that we're doing the best we can, and so we're owning when we mess up and when that happens too, but still showing up at that table. So yeah, thanks for saying that too. There's lots of times, usually I do a 6-hour training, so typically this is a 6-hour training, so you get the really condensed version, but if you want to come to the long training, let me know. But I tell lots of stories where I failed. So I was like, yep, that was my fail moment. Here you go. So we can learn from each other, not first attempt in learning. So I've talked a lot about adolescent development and what does it really mean? What is positive youth development? So like I said, it's that successful transition into adulthood. How do we help young people with that successful transition? And how do we step away from maybe our individual programs and needs? Like my program is to have young people show up to start so many meetings. How do I step back from that and say, okay, what do the young people need to successfully transition to adulthood, and how do I create that space? So the core components are skills, opportunities, authentic relationships. I'll talk about that a little bit more. To make those successful, we really have to think about PYD and that outer ring, those puzzle pieces. So we have to have environments that are inclusive, right? Not just inclusive of all different young people, but also views culture. So acknowledging that there's a different culture that young people go through and experience, just like there's different generational cultures as well. That we're engaging youth, right? We know that young people are the experts in their own experiences and that we should be hearing from them so we can create our programs, policies, and practices that serve their needs. That we're collaborative, and this is more as organizations. So I work for state government, and one thing that I see is that we're often not even collaborative within our building. And so how do we really be thoughtful and collaborate across organizations so we can meet the needs of young people, so we can work together and support them so they don't have to be running around to get their needs met, that we're working together. We're creating things with sustainability in mind, not just with funding, but with staffing. I typically know I work before and after school care. I typically see that sometimes we'll start a program. This is especially true in public health. We'll do it for a little bit, we'll run out of funding, and it ends. And so how do we think about with sustainability in the future as well? And then strengths-based. How can we see the strengths of young people, focus on those strengths in our conversations, when we talk about them? What does that look like so we're seeing young people's strengths? Does anyone have questions about PYD or anything like that coming up?
We just had, Christina had mentioned the training that's coming up.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, Christina. Yes, we have a full day training. It'll be a little bit more interactive. We'll be sharing stuff too. So I encourage you, if you want to come to that full day training, let me know. And more about implementation and how do we use this approach in the work that we do. All right, so the first one of those core components are skills. And I hate talking about skills and hard and soft skills because I think those are like misleading names. But often it's easier to think about the hard skills that young people need, and it's really how do we expand those to the soft skills? And how do we integrate that learning of skills in all the spaces that young people are at? When they come into the clinic and have a conversation with you, are we helping them gain some skills in communication or conversation or decision making? What does that look like to practice that? In the classroom, and we're doing math, are we learning like team building skills or interaction? What does that look like there? How do we think about the skills that young people need in all the spaces and places that there are, especially those soft skills? So I think we tend as a society to forget those, and no one was ever, well, I wouldn't say no one, but typically when I ask people what skills make them successful, people don't say like Microsoft Office or Word or trigonometry or things like that. They talk about skills like communication or resiliency or things like that, and also helping young people see when they have skills. What I've seen from our young people is they're like, oh, I'm on the basketball team, I just play basketball. And I was like, no, you are able to communicate with your teammates. You're able to build those connections. There's a ton of spaces that sometimes young people don't see the skills that they have. And a lot of young people that I work with feel like, or have been told, or experience them feeling that they don't have skills. And some of them are the most resilient young people that I know. And so highlighting that, the skills that they do have, and creating spaces. And it doesn't have to be an extra job. So sometimes I feel like people are like, okay, skills, we need to set up a goal setting workshop. Awesome, but it can also be embedded in the work that you do. You know, can you give young people leadership skills within the program that you're running? Is there a way, do young people that come into your clinic want to start an advisory council for the clinic, that we're offering them opportunities to build those skills? I worked with an organization that did maybe not as relevant to folks on the phone, but did a fundraising event. And so this event, they have brought young people into the event and helped them plan it. And so the skills that you get from event planning is huge. So all the opportunities that we can give to help young people gain skills. That we have to have opportunities to practice those skills. Sometimes we're really good at like focusing on like, okay, we took this class, we gained these skills. Young people have to have the opportunity to practice them. And I say practice them in real life, which sounds a little bit funny, but practice like in the moment. Like, what does it look like to make healthy decisions in the moment? Like, we can talk about it. How do we practice? Come back, try it again, try it a different way, and we're allowing them to practice those skills. And then authentic relationships. And this is probably like my heart when I think about authentic relationships, but really, as much as young people want that independence, they really rely on adults for that support when they're going through this transitional time. And so we've seen from the data how important those authentic relationships are. We know that if young people have a trusted adult that they can go to in a time of need, they're much less likely to engage in lots of different risky behaviors. But also that we know that young people interact with adults in lots of spaces. And how can we create those authentic relationships, whether it's in the clinic, the classroom, the after-school program, the community center? What does that look like? And how can we have adults that are supportive, caring, and engaged? And I have some pictures up here, and these pictures make me happy. So I have, if you didn't know, it was The Karate Kid, which I have had places where people didn't know that movie. So I put up Harry Potter to hopefully reach more folks. But when we think about those relationships, Mr. Miyagi wasn't like super easy on Daniel. Like he held Daniel accountable to high standards and had boundaries. And so thinking about those relationships, that we're not just showing up as like, oh, I'm authentic and caring, whatever you need, whatever you want. No, we're like saying, I believe in more than you. Like I believe in more than this for you. I can see this for you, right? And so building those relationships where young people feel like they can go, be challenged in a way that supports them, but also that you are showing up and caring and engaged in their lives. And I have a Maya Angelou quote, because one thing that we know is that programs don't change people, people change people. And so the power of you in the clinic, in the classroom, wherever you're at, you in the front area, that the power to create that trust and relationship is so important. So when thinking about relationships, I had someone explain to me an analogy of like a piggy bank, and that when you're interacting with a young person, you always have opportunity to drop coins in that piggy bank. And you have an opportunity to take coins away, and not, like to know no shame and blame if you take coins away, but to own that. Hey, I think I might have damaged this relationship or that experience. But even if you don't build that strong relationship with that young person, if you keep putting coins in there, maybe they will have that next relationship with the next person they see. So even if you're the provider in a school-based health center, you build a somewhat relationship, maybe that young person will be able to build a better relationship with their next healthcare provider because you've established some sort of trust in that space. And so I try to think about every interaction I have with a young person. What does it look like, those coins in the piggy bank? And sometimes interactions that we don't even really remember had a huge impact on young people, for both could be good or bad. I had a friend share with me that he does drama. He's a drama teacher, and so he had this like performance, and this student was in kindergarten, and he like after the show was like, you did great, and had a conversation with him, and then I guess like 10, 15 years later, this person wrote him a letter about how impactful that experience was. He said, I don't even remember what I said. I remember that young person, but just that interaction made that person feel connected, supported, cared about, and made them want to show up. And so the power of that too, that we can create spaces for young people to be connected to those adults, and to get their questions answered. So just, when you reflect on this piece, think about that adult in your life that was that authentic relationship for you and how they impacted your life, and how important that was, and what did it make you feel? I think about my 5th grade teacher, and my parents were going through a divorce in 5th grade, and not everyone, like I was like one of the only people that, my parents were experienced that divorce, and I didn't know a lot of people. We didn't even talk about the divorce, but he saw something in me that I didn't see. He always asked me how I was. He connected with me. So we didn't even have to talk about what I was experiencing, but I knew that I felt better when I was around him because of the way he made me feel. And so how do we support our young people with those authentic relationships and how important that is? So these are the 5 principles: engage youth as partners, sustainable, strengths-based, collaborative, and inclusive. Really that engages youth as partners. We're valuing the young people's expertise to be the context experts. So one way to think about this is that we can have content experts and we can have context experts, and valuing the context experts. I don't really remember what it was like to be in high school and that experience, but our young people do. And so they know the context of what's happening, and so allowing them that space to be the context experts. And if you come to the full day training, we talk a little bit about what does it mean to engage young people. Strengths-based, one of the things I think about with this is what language are we using? Are we using language that's focused on the strengths of young people? Or are we using language that is not thinking about their strengths? And I think often in our systems and our structures, we don't typically use strengths-based. So one thing that we're trying to do, which we don't always do well, is when we think about the term at-risk youth, that it's typically not the youth issue that they're at risk, it's the things in the community, experiences they had. So trying to use different language, because young people typically know if they're called the at-risk youth, and that's a label that they have to wear. And so trying to just even use different language so that we're not seeing them as at risk, we're seeing that we need to think about things from a structural point of view on what's happening in the lives of those young people. So marginalized youth or opportunity youth, or different ways to think about young people that are experiencing that. So we talked a lot about authentic relationships, and that's kind of like, I would say my bread and butter, that's what I'm most passionate about because I've seen the impact. So how do we think about authentic relationships within and the conversations that we might have with young people when they're coming into our spaces? So these are things that I have heard. So I should probably start over. In the work that I do, I work with the Youth Advisory Council, and we have been lucky enough to have school-based health centers come in and talk about improving practices within their own clinics and around surveys. So young people informing some surveys around school-based health centers of what language to use. And so in those conversations, these are kind of a quick summary of some things that young people have said, but these are some barriers to conversations or barriers to those relationships. And I'm sure many of you probably experienced that, but it's a short amount of time to build a relationship in a short amount of time, often in the classroom, in the clinic, in other spaces. We don't have a ton of time to create that relationship. So how do we build or make connections or create more time? What does that look like in our offices? What could that look like? So thinking about in your own office, what would it look like to allow time or space to build those relationships so that young people feel comfortable in coming into this space? Young people often have concerns that they will get judged by their provider. So again, telling them the honest truth, that's a hard thing to do. And so how do we create that space so it doesn't feel like a hard of a lift to be honest and share your experience? Often feel like there were stereotypes. So I had young people on both sides feel that providers thought they would have done certain behaviors or not done certain behaviors because of the way they looked or their age. And even if that wasn't what the provider's thought processes were, in the conversation, they felt as though that provider made that assumption about them. I hear all the time about confidentiality. What is confidential? What is not? What do you have to report to someone? What do you not have to report to someone? So that our young people talked about this at length. We talked about telemedicine and the fear of confidentiality. We talked about reporting things on forms. And so having that conversation about what actually is confidential, what's not, what does this relationship look like? Maybe everything's confidential, maybe certain things aren't. What does it look like in your clinic? What does that mean so that you have that trusting relationship? Because this is something that I think every year that I've done this advisory council, I think this is my 4th year, we have talked about confidentiality and young people not knowing what that looks like for them. And oftentimes young people not knowing what their rights are, I think kind of connects to this too. So what are their rights to access care or not access care, and thinking about confidentiality. Taking surveys. So we had a little bit of discussion about this, but young people felt surveys were impersonal and wanted more opportunities for conversation. So I don't think that this means that you can't do surveys. Obviously, we have to take surveys in those clinical sections, but what does it mean to have conversations about what they put in that survey? I did a presentation with other folks as part of school-based health centers, and it was interesting. One thing that came up was that they asked about goals or dreams or things within that survey, but 95% of the time, they never talked about that. So if you're asking those questions, is there space to talk about it? Or is there some way to talk about why these questions are on there? What does that look like for young people? So even if you can't change the survey, you may be having discussions about why this is important to them, why we want to talk about this, and do they want to talk about their dreams because they asked about it. They also talked about wanting providers to ask them what's important to them. So when they come into the clinic and they ask the survey, having the provider ask, hey, what do you want to talk about in this setting today? Even though you might see some issues or risk behaviors or things that you need to talk about, can we start with what do they want to focus on? I don't think I have this here, but risk reduction was something that came up in our conversations, that maybe they want to choose to do something, but is there a way to do it safer for them? And what does that look like? And how do they make decisions around what makes the most sense for them in their lives? Asking permission to have conversation or discussion, which is an interesting way. Often when we hear ask permission, it sounds a little clunky, but can I talk to you about this today? Is this a good time, or should we do it at another visit? It's amazing that just asking that for permission, if that young person says yes, that you've created that space to engage in dialogue. And then collaborating with them, that this is a joint thing that we're doing together, their health. And so wanting to feel like they have someone on their team that's supporting them and navigating those difficult conversations or their experiences. So how do we work together on this? So I'm going to give you an opportunity to share out. So either question, I know we haven't had a ton of share out, but are there any other barriers that make relationships or conversations difficult? Or are there things that you've done to build trust, have those challenging conversations? What did you do? So either of those two questions, if there are things you want to put in the chat box, or I don't know if I can unmute the phone, but I just wanted to give people a chance to share about what this looks like in their spaces. And I know we're reaching somewhat towards the end, so I'm like,
I have a comment. So I'm not in a school-based health center, obviously, but I am a volunteer tester at a sexual health clinic. And just something that I found that really does a good job of like opening up the conversation is just starting out by saying, like, how can I be most helpful to you today? Because then that's like, I mean, kind of gives them the lead and kind of lets them open it up to like whatever might be on their mind. See where they're at.
I love that.
Yeah. And then that kind of opens the permission aspect too, because it's starting with them. So
or even ending too. Is there anything else you want to talk about today over here? Yeah. I've also had young people share too about like going into a clinic that sometimes school-based health centers that they get called out in the middle of class to go somewhere, and then everyone in the class knows that they're going to the school-based health center, and what are their assumptions about that, and what does that mean for them? So what does that look like? It may not feel like embarrassing for adults, but the young people are like, I did not want to be called out in class to go to the center. It was like, oh my gosh, I was so embarrassed. And so are there other ways to do that? I don't know the answers to these, but just things to think about that if we have young people informing what we do, engaging them, they can help think through some of the things that are like, oh man, I never actually thought about what that would look like, or what does it mean to walk in? Is the clinic space and then like open for everyone to see? Does that matter to young people in your spaces? What does that look like? So trust, I think we know this, but I think giving the time and space to allow people to feel comfortable, reducing that space where their lids are flipped or they're in that amygdala hijack, amygdala response. And so how do we create that space? How as adults can we be seen around the school? If we're in the school, what does it look like to build that trust? And so just thinking about that, I'm sure lots of you have thought about this too, but continue to think about what does it look like to build trust there. I'm gonna skip this share out. Oftentimes I hear young people say that they don't feel heard. And so that active listening piece and not listening to respond, how challenging that is. So really listening and hearing what young people say. You don't have to agree with it. So just giving that space for them to hear, because in many spaces, young people don't have the opportunity to share that voice. Empathizing and validating their feelings. And these are things I would say for all humans, but especially for young people, that feeling validation can open the door to those conversations. So you don't have to say that you agree with that behavior, but man, it was really tough for you to make that decision. Or I can see how complicated this situation was for you. Or just knowing you seem really upset. Calling that out, so it's okay to feel those emotions. Judgment, I know we all don't want to show judgment in these settings. I have had to work on my face. I often will reflect what I'm feeling on my face, and if I don't want to show judgment, if a young person's telling me something super personal, maybe you all on the phone are better at this than I am, but I've had to be like, okay, tell me more about that, or give myself pause to think about, wow, this is actually pretty shocking. Asking questions and checking for understanding. Sometimes as adults, we have made assumptions about questions that young people are asking. So I had a coworker that taught sexual health education. When her children were ready to talk about sex, she was like all in. Thank goodness there's someone that does that, because that's not my jam. I'm not great at talking about people about sex, but she's in the car with her daughter. They had dropped another daughter off at camp. It's summer camp. And the daughter in the backseat, I think she's about 6. She's like, Mom, what is it when two people sleep on top of each other? The mom was like, okay, I'm ready. I've waited my whole life for this. Like, I teach this to all young people. I'm ready to talk to my daughter. She like dives in, talking about all the different things and age-appropriate stuff and talking about it. And about halfway through, the daughter was like, no, what is it when two beds are on top of each other? And their actual question was like, what are bunk beds? Because she just been to camp and she'd seen beds on top of each other. And so the assumption by the mom was like, oh, people sleeping on top of each other, that is sex. Let's talk about it. So just double checking, we're like, tell me more about that. What do you mean about that? What questions do you have? And so trying to dive in to figure out a little bit more about, what is this young person actually asking me? How do I follow up with them? Is that what you're asking? Do you want some different information? So we're not going down pathways that they're like, who is this person? What are they talking about? Like, this is not the question that I wanted answered. Again, asking for permission, giving information simply. We know with development that taking in a lot of new information is challenging. So how do we give young people just the information they need? Like about sex, you could give them information about everything. So asking those clarifying questions, what do they really want to know about? Do they want to know about disease transmission? Do they want to know about condom use? What are those questions? What do we want to provide with them, and not overwhelming them, but creating that space they can continue to ask questions. Sometimes adults, we forget that this place comes from caring and concern. So it feels like you're just trying to tell me what to do. And no, I want you to make the best decision for you. What is this, offering that caring for concern? I think bridging gaps in conversation, especially difficult conversations, that you have the opportunity for choice. right? That we know as young people want to make their own decisions, that independence, that, okay, this is your choice. What are some options? Let's think about some options together. What would your next step be? That it's not our choice, it's their choice. And so that opens up that space, especially if you're thinking about behavior change and difficult things to move on to next steps. What do those things look like, and how do we help them figure out what their choice is? A lot of this comes from motivational interviewing. So if you are skilled in that or you have a background in that, awesome. There's a book called, oh gosh, I'm going to forget the name of the book, Team Speak, and it's written by a nurse practitioner, and it's focused on behavior change and motivational interviewing and difficult conversations with young people. So super amazing, love the book because it applied motivational interviewing in an easy way to youth, and how do you have those difficult health conversations. So I can share that out afterwards. It's pretty awesome. Healthy choices. What information do they need? Sometimes as adults, I think we're afraid to acknowledge the positive and negative to every choice. Like if you are going to have a conversation with young people about substance use, there are some positive choices for them in that situation, right? They're connecting with friends. They feel a high, whatever that looks like. So if you can't acknowledge some of the positive choices that maybe they're sharing with you, it feels inauthentic. So it doesn't mean focus all the time on that, but I think to be honest and authentic, you have to acknowledge that there's two things to every side, right? I mean, maybe they're not ready for sex, but sex also feels great. Like we can't say on one side that like, don't do sex, the first time you have sex, you'll get pregnant, it won't be great, all these horrible things, because then we've lost credibility, and guaranteed they probably know someone that's had that experience that was positive, and so now they're trying to decide in their mind, okay, this person said it was really awesome and all these great things, this person said it's horrible, so it's like, what does that look like for them in navigating that? So maybe there are some positives. What would that look like for you? Are you ready for that? Navigating those difficult conversations, not just being on that fear-based side, that there are positives for that young people. How do some of their decisions get in the way of the things that they want to do? So does substance use get in the way of things that they're passionate about or the things that they want to do? Have they missed out on things because they've used substances? This can be kind of long-term, but I think it's also really important to talk about those short-term things. So do you know someone that got kicked off the team for using marijuana or got expelled because of that? Could they go to prom? What would happen if they got caught at prom? What would that mean for them? You know, relating it to the here and now and how it gets in the way of the things that they're passionate about. Every young person has a passion and things they love to do. Where can we start to think about things that get in the way of that? And what would that look like? Whether it's a consequence, whether it's a health behavior thing that gets in the way of that, what would that look like? This is the ORs. So if you've done motivational interview, I think I'm going to go a little bit quickly over that because we're almost out of time. So just some things to think about. Obviously, this isn't an MI or motivational interviewing training. Open-ended questions, finding the affirmation and affirming that good behavior, that we're reflecting back, way more powerful than answering questions, which was my learning experience, that reflections are statements, they're not questions. So if you reflect back how someone feels, if it's incorrect, 95% of the time that person will correct you. Like, you feel really angry because you didn't get to go on the field trip. I'm like, no, I'm angry because the teacher yelled at me for this and this and this. And typically with young people, they will correct you if you say something wrong about how they're feeling. So I think this is actually more powerful, and you really have to listen to know what to reflect. And you can make guesses. It's okay to make guesses because then they can correct you, and you know then if you're incorrect. Summarizing the end of your conversation and next steps, pulling out the key components. It's a great way for people to feel heard. You summarize at the end, they've heard what you said, and they know you've heard what they've said, and often young people don't feel that way. These are some things that come from sexual health places, but I found it was sexual health work, I found it was really helpful. If you can narrow down the type of question that they're asking you, it's helpful then to know how to respond. So a request for information might be you want to know more information about a topic, you need some information, you heard this term. You might answer that differently than if a young person is asking, am I normal? Really, that they're saying, is this typically what's supposed to be happening to me? And then you might answer more than just information, or you might answer yes, that is normal. Here are some other people, here's some information about that. Permission seeking could be where's that line in the sand? Where am I going to get judged or this piece from this person? Shock questions are just like they sound. They're designed to shock you and make you feel uncomfortable. So when you get a shock question, you can be like, hey, did you want a shock page? Are you trying to make me feel uncomfortable? You can call it like it is. Or you can be like, hey, let's look that up together. That's an interesting question. I get that a lot. Let me look that up with you. Personal beliefs, I think this is the most challenging, I think, especially if you're in a provider's office or any place where you're not in the home. I really don't want to share my personal beliefs about an experience with that young person because it could challenge challenge whatever's in their family. And so a personal belief question, they kind of can be disguised maybe in request for information. Like a great personal question is like, it's not okay to masturbate, right? Like there's a lot of things about masturbation, okay or not okay, there's values and beliefs about that. And so for me, if I get a question that is connected to my personal belief, I kind of maybe ask a couple more questions to see if it is a personal belief question. And then I might answer in a way that some people choose to masturbate, some people choose not to do that. What does that mean for you? How do you feel about it? What is your experience, exploring your body? What are the facts around that? Typically we think that people should explore their body. How do you feel about that? So personal belief questions, if you can do, what are the facts out there? What are the information out there? What are the actual facts online? Like it could be if you're asking about disease transmission, if it's wrapped up in values, like what are the actual facts about how you get that disease and who gets that disease and who doesn't, or whatever that looks like. So I think I try to answer personal belief questions very carefully. These can be wrapped up in different questions. You can ask shock questions with personal belief or write other questions together. So you have to ask more questions to know what they're wanting to know. But this is helpful for me to kind of dig down and like, okay, we really need to look up more information together, or we need to talk about what information they need. Or maybe it's the permission seeking, and what would that mean if they did that at school? Would they get expelled? What are those consequences for them? And again, asking for permission. Tips and tricks, buying yourself some time. If you get asked a question, you're like, oh crap, how do I answer that? Thanks for asking that. That's a great question. Validating, I get asked that question all the time. Looking up information, and this is that way to answer personal belief questions. Some people choose to do this, for others they choose to do this. What does that mean for you? What does that look like? And then this is my last slide. We kind of rushed through the end. Lots of things about conversation. I do a 2-hour training just on conversations as well. So if you're interested in that, let me know. But knowing that you're going to fail, I appreciate that, Whitney. In conversations, like there's a number of times that I've said things and I'm like, whoa, that's not what I meant, or I burned that relationship, want to come back to that. And remembering that we're not young people anymore. So we try to show up as much as I want to feel like a young person. I'm not within that culture anymore. So owning that and allowing them that space to show up as they are. And then to be authentic, I just need to show up as I am and ask those questions and build those relationships. So I love Parks and Rec. So a thing about youth culture, it's different. We grew up in different times. We know there's different things that are happening. So just some things to remember about when we think about those conversations. So it's quick and dirty at the end. Sorry about that. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts or things they want to add about those conversations and relationship building or PYD?
Unmute.
Oh yeah, unmute. Oh, do I have to unmute? Then I'm like, oh gosh, that's my job.
It'll be easier to.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you're unmuted. So if you're having side conversations, we'll be able to hear it now. But does anyone have any thoughts or questions or things they want to add about conversations or positive youth development? Give us 1 second. We got to turn up the volume on our end so we can hear you. What was that? Does someone have a question or a comment?
Okay.
Doesn't sound like it. Anyone else? It's hard not seeing people's faces. I'm like, what are people thinking? Okay. If you have any thoughts or want more resources, I will share some resources I have. Whitney has a ton of resources. I'm sure you can reach out to her as well if you have questions about some of the data pieces. But yeah, thanks for being on the webinar with us. And I hope that I get to meet you all in person sometime soon.
I've just left a note in the chat box. So please make sure that everyone fills out the post-training survey using the same unique ID that you used for the pre-training survey. And the link is right there in the chat box. So.
Thanks, everybody. Please reach out. Love to hear from you. Do you want to go?